There is a place on Earth where night is never complete, where the sky tears open in silence. Not once, not a few times, but 280 times per hour, for more than 150 nights a year. No thunder, no storm, just light. Imagine this for a moment. You are in a boat in the middle of a vast lake. The sun has just set. Darkness begins to descend upon the water. You await the complete silence of the night. You await the sky to fade away. But he doesn't delete it. He never deletes it. Suddenly, a bright electric light rips across the horizon, then another, and yet another. There's no pause long enough for your eyes to adjust to the darkness, because the darkness never truly arrives. The sky blinks, as if it were breathing, as if it had its own pulse. For 5 centuries, navigators followed this light without understanding what it was, without knowing where it came from, without comprehending why that specific point on the planet refused to sleep. Entire populations looked up, trying to decipher whether it was a warning, a message, or a presence that had always been there, but that they were only now learning to perceive. Science, of course, has its explanations. It speaks of winds, humidity, geography, and all of that is true. But those who live there know something that numbers don't capture. When the sky insists on speaking for 10 hours straight, every night for thousands of years, perhaps it's not just the sky. Perhaps it's the earth itself reminding us of something that we, in our modern haste, have completely forgotten. Welcome to the Catatumbo Lightning, the place where God never extinguishes the light, or where nature decided that total darkness would not be allowed. Or perhaps, just perhaps, where something much greater than any human explanation chose to manifest itself in the only way we can perceive it, through light. In northern Venezuela, very close to the border with Colombia, there is a river called Catatumbo. It is not famous for its length. It is not the widest. It is not the deepest. It does not carry legends of lost civilizations. It does not hold buried treasures on its shores. There are no stories of sea monsters or ghost ships. In every practical sense, it's just an ordinary river, water flowing from one place to another. Nothing more, nothing less. But there is something about it that no other river on the planet possesses. Something that is not in its waters, something that cannot be seen during the day, something that only reveals itself when the sun disappears completely. When this river meets Lake Maracaibo, the largest lake in South America, something invisible begins to move. Not in the water, not on the ground, but in the air, high above everything. During the day, absolutely nothing indicates what lies ahead. The landscape is almost unassuming. Still water reflecting the blue sky, dense vegetation growing on the banks, hot, humid air, heavy, still, a silence that seems eternal. The kind of place you would cross by boat without looking twice. There are no monuments, there are no signs indicating that something extraordinary happens there. There are no crowds of tourists pointing cameras. During the day, it's just another point on the map. Just another confluence of river and lake, of which there are thousands around the world. But when the sun disappears behind the horizon, when the last orange streaks of light dissolve in the west, when night begins to reclaim its territory, the sky above that exact point changes completely. Not gradually, not timidly, not as if testing the waters. Suddenly, without warning, the first light appears. Silent. Completely silent, white, electric, pure visual energy without the accompanying sound we normally associate with lightning. It's as if someone cut the audio from the universe but left the video playing. And then another light appears, a little further to the left, then another further to the right, then 3 at the same time, then a sequence so fast you lose count. There is no pause long enough for the sky to rest. There is no interval where you can say, it's over, because it doesn't end. It simply doesn't end. In a single night, at that specific point on the planet, more than 28,000 lightning strikes can occur. Let me repeat that. 28,000 lightning strikes in one night. This is not poetic exaggeration. It is not artistic license. It is not a vague estimate. It is scientific measurement. These are data collected by precise instruments over years of observation. 280 lightning strikes per hour. If you do the math, that's roughly one lightning strike every 13 seconds, for hours, all night long, night after night, week after week, month after month. 1.2 million lightning strikes per year. 1,200,000. Try to visualize that. Try to imagine a sky that splits 1.2 million times in 365 days. The sky there doesn't blink. It breathes light, as if light were the oxygen of that specific part of the atmosphere, as if it couldn't exist without it. And those who live nearby learn quickly, within the first few weeks of living in the area, that there's no point in waiting for complete darkness. There's no point in waiting for the moment when the sky finally calms down, because it doesn't calm down. It simply doesn't know how to do that. Children born there grow up believing this is normal, that every sky in the world behaves this way, that every night everywhere is punctuated by silent flashes of light. Only when they travel to other places, only when they sleep for the first time under a completely dark sky, do they realize how extraordinary the place where they were born is. Because at that point on the planet, night is not the absence of light. It never has been. Night there is merely the interval between one luminosity and another. It is the space between two flashes. It is the pause that barely exists before the next light appears. And that changes everything. It changes the way people live. It changes the way they sleep. It changes the way they perceive time. Fundamentally, it changes their relationship with the very concept of darkness. Because when darkness is never total, when there's always light on the horizon, when the sky refuses to completely darken, you stop fearing the night. You stop associating darkness with danger. You stop needing lanterns, candles, and bonfires to feel safe. Heaven takes care of it for you, night after night, century after century, millennium after millennium.
For centuries, no one knew how to explain what was happening there. It was treated as a mystery, as a divine phenomenon, as a manifestation of forces beyond human comprehension. And perhaps, in a certain sense, it still is all of that. But science, with its stubborn nature and its refusal to accept "we don't know" as a final answer, eventually arrived with its instruments, its measurements, its calculations, its insatiable need to transform mystery into data. And he discovered something that, even though it is scientific, is nonetheless extraordinary. The Catatumbo Lightning occurs because three natural forces meet at that exact point on Earth. Three elements that, on their own, are common, but together in that specific configuration, in that precise balance, they create something that doesn't exist anywhere else on the planet with the same intensity and consistency. First, the winds that descend from the Andes. These enormous mountains, these giants of stone and ice, create currents of cold, dense, and heavy air. This air descends from the heights like water cascading down a waterfall, always seeking the lowest point, the place where it can settle. Secondly, there's the warm, humid air that constantly rises from Lake Maracaibo. This gigantic lake, almost an inland sea, evaporates water all the time. During the day, the sun heats the surface. The water turns into vapor. This vapor rises, carrying with it moisture, heat, and energy. Third, and this is the element that many are unaware of, is the methane that escapes from the swampy soil of the region. The area around Catatumbo is rich in swamps, in flooded terrain where organic matter constantly decomposes. This decomposition releases methane, a gas that rises silently, invisibly, accumulating in the lower atmosphere. When these three forces collide, when the cold mountain air meets the warm lake air, when both mix with the methane suspended in the air, the sky has no choice. It breaks apart. It releases the accumulated tension in the only way it can, through electrical discharges, through light. It's pure physics. It's the atmosphere behaving exactly as it should under those specific conditions. There's nothing supernatural about it, scientists would say. It's just nature following its own laws. And all of this is true, completely true. The explanation is solid, the data confirms it, the measurements support the theory. But, and here's the detail that science can't fully explain, why only there? Think about it. There are other places in the world with high mountains. There are other enormous lakes. There are other swamps releasing methane. These three conditions are not unique. They are not exclusive to that region. The European Alps have mountains as high as the Andes. Lakes like Victoria in Africa or Superior in North America are immense. Swamps exist on every continent, constantly releasing methane. But none of these places produces this phenomenon with this intensity, with this consistency, with this almost obsessive persistence.
The Catatumbo doesn't happen occasionally. It's not something you need to be lucky to see. It's not the kind of natural event that requires perfect conditions and careful planning. It happens every night, or almost every night, more than 150 nights a year, in the same region, at the same point on the map, with the same frequency as the sun rises in the east and sets in the west. As if the heavens had chosen that specific place, as if they had looked at the entire planet, analyzed all the options, all the valleys, all the confluences of rivers and lakes, and decided, here, this is where I will manifest myself. This is where I will show my strength. This is where I will refuse silence. Science explains the how. It explains the mechanism. It explains the physical and chemical processes that generate the phenomenon. But the why exactly here remains shrouded in something that numbers don't fully capture. It's like looking at a master painting and having someone explain the chemistry of the paints, the physics of light reflected on the canvas, the geometry of the proportions. All true, all correct. But does that explain why the painting makes you feel something when you look at it? Perhaps some natural phenomena are like that, understandable in their mechanisms but inexplicable in their essence. You can dissect each part, you can measure each component, you can build perfect mathematical models. But in the end, when you're standing there in the middle of the night, with the sky silently splitting apart above you 280 times an hour, when you feel the magnitude of it, when you realize that this has been happening for thousands of years and will probably continue to happen long after you're gone, the numbers suddenly seem insufficient. They tell you what's happening, but they don't tell you what it means. And perhaps that's why, even after all the scientific explanations, even after all the published papers and confirmed measurements, that place continues to be called sacred by those who live near it. Because sacred is not what cannot be explained. Sacred is what, even when explained, continues to inspire reverence. It continues to make you stop. It continues to remind you that there are forces in the universe far greater than any individual comprehension.
Long before satellites orbited the planet, long before GPS existed in anyone's pocket, long before digital maps showed your exact location in real time, long before all of that, navigating the world's oceans and seas was an act of absolute faith. You left solid ground behind and entered a world where everything seemed the same. Dark water in every direction, horizons dissolving into mist, nights without visible landmarks when clouds obscured the stars. Getting lost wasn't a remote possibility, it was almost a certainty. History is full of ships that simply disappeared, that left a port and were never seen again, that became legends because there was no way to track them, to know what happened, to find them in the vastness of the waters. Sailing was about trusting that the wind would carry you in the right direction. It was about trusting that the stars would be visible when you needed them. It was about trusting that your distance estimate was at least close to reality. It was, above all, about trusting in luck. But in the Caribbean, off the northern coast of South America, navigators had something that no other sea in the world offered. Something that no cartographer had drawn on maps, something that no king had ordered to be built, something that was simply there, night after night, century after century. A light that never failed. They called it the Lighthouse of Maracaibo. Some called it the Lighthouse of Catatumbo. The names varied, but the phenomenon was always the same, a constant light on the horizon, a visual landmark visible from dozens of kilometers away. There was no stone tower supporting that light. There was no guardian feeding a flame with oil. There was no human structure whatsoever. There was nothing that needed maintenance, repair, or constant vigilance. The light was simply there, emerging from the sky itself, as if the universe had decided to place a permanent mark there, at that specific point in the ocean, an eternal beacon. Night after night, decade after decade, century after century, that light persisted. Entire generations of sailors learned to look for it. Fathers taught sons. Experienced captains instructed novices. When you see the light on the horizon, you'll know where you are. You'll know you're close to shore. You'll know you're not lost. And that, in a world where getting lost often meant dying of thirst or hunger adrift, where it meant never seeing your family again, where it meant becoming just another name on a list of missing persons, that was an invaluable gift. When everything around was uncertain, when the sea became aggressive, when storms obscured the stars, when sanity itself began to be tested by the endless monotony of the horizon, that light remained, consistent, reliable, present. Sailors adjusted their courses by looking at that distant light. They made mental calculations based on its position. They decided when to turn, when to continue forward, when to drop anchor and wait for daylight.
Not because they blindly trusted her as if she were something divine, not because they thought she had any intelligence or intention, but simply because she never disappeared. And constancy at sea is more valuable than gold. Because humans can turn off a light bulb, they can forget to refill it, they can destroy a tower in a war, they can abandon a post, they can fail. But you can't negotiate with the heavens. You can't turn off an atmospheric phenomenon. You can't cancel natural forces. The Catatumbo Lightning didn't require maintenance. It didn't demand salaries for guards. It didn't need oil, fuel, or electricity. It didn't have parts that wore out. It didn't have a structure that aged. It just happened. Automatically, naturally, eternally. And perhaps that's why he was so respected. Not out of fear, not out of superstition, but for something more fundamental, for recognition. Recognition that there are things in the world that function independently of human will, that there are systems so much larger than any civilization, any empire, any historical era that will continue to function long after all our constructions have turned to dust. The sailors who used that light to orient themselves understood it intuitively. They didn't need scientific explanations. They didn't need to know about Andean winds or swamp methane. They just needed to know that the light would be there. And she was. She was always there. Until it starts to fail. But that comes later. For centuries, that light was the difference between life and death for countless navigators. It was the landmark that enabled trade, exploration, migration. It was, literally, a natural lighthouse guiding humanity through the dark waters. And the most impressive thing, nobody built it, nobody planned it, nobody decided that there should be a light there to help navigators. She was simply there, as if the universe, in its inscrutable wisdom, had placed exactly what was needed, exactly where it was needed, long before any human realized they needed it. The Bari lived for generations under that sky. Hundreds of years, perhaps thousands.
so long that no one in the tribe could remember when their ancestors arrived there, or if they had always been there, if that land had always been theirs. And throughout all that time, night after night, they watched the sky light up. For those of us who live in cities where artificial light has extinguished the stars, where the constant glare of streets and buildings has made us forget what true darkness looks like, it is difficult to comprehend the impact such a phenomenon would have on a culture that lives in direct connection with nature. But for the Bari people, those lightning flashes were never just electricity. They were never just an interesting atmospheric event. They were never just a phenomenon to be observed casually. They believed, with a certainty that needed no proof or argument, that those lights were ancestral spirits crossing the clouds. Not lost spirits wandering aimlessly, not suffering souls seeking rest, not ghosts trapped between worlds, but guardians, observers, protectors. The tribe's elders taught the children from a young age. When the sky lit up, it wasn't something to fear, it was something to be grateful for, because it meant that those who came before were still there, still caring, still watching. They illuminated the night not out of obligation, but out of love, out of commitment, as a constant reminder that life was never alone, that there was always something greater watching over us. There were always ancient and wise eyes observing from above. There were no elaborate rituals to appease these spirits. There were no complex offerings. There was no fear of reprisals if something was done wrong. The relationship was not one of submission or terror. It was one of coexistence, of mutual respect, of trust. The sky twinkled, and the Bari people knew they were safe. The earth breathed, and they breathed along with it. And between the two, between sky and earth, between light and darkness, between spirits and the living, there existed a balance that didn't need to be explained in words. It was felt. It was lived. It was part of the very fabric of existence. The Wayu, another people who inhabited the region, had a different but equally profound interpretation. For them, lightning wasn't just spirits passing through, it was something more fundamental. It was the very mechanism by which the universe maintained its balance. They saw the world as a constant interplay of opposing forces that needed to balance each other, heaven and earth, light and darkness, heat and cold, drought and rain, life and death, male and female, young and old. Nothing in the universe existed in static harmony, according to them. Everything was tension, everything was movement, everything was the constant encounter between opposites that tried to cancel each other out, but in the process, created everything that existed. And the lightning strike at Catatumbo was the clearest, most visible, most undeniable manifestation of this fundamental truth. It didn't resolve the tension between heaven and earth, it made it visible. It showed 280 times an hour that the universe was alive, precisely because it wasn't at peace. It was in motion. It was constantly creating and destroying and recreating.
And somehow this brought peace to the Wayu. Not the peace of the absence of conflict, but the peace of understanding that conflict is natural. It is necessary. It is, in fact, the very essence of existence. Seeing the lightning was a reminder that being alive meant being in a state of tension. It meant being in the midst of greater forces. It meant participating, even without realizing it, in a cosmic balance that was happening all the time, everywhere, but which, at that specific point on the planet, became impossible to ignore. The most interesting thing about these two perspectives, that of the body and that of the Wayu, is not deciding which is right or wrong. It's not about trying to validate one through science and dismissing the other as superstition. That's because both recognize something that science, with all its precision and all its instruments, cannot fully capture: the intention behind the repetition. Because when something happens only once, you call it chance. It's luck, it's coincidence, it's the universe being random. When it happens a few times, you start to suspect a pattern, but it can still be explained as a series of coincidences. But when it happens every night,
when it happens 280 times an hour, when it happens 1.2 million times a year, when it happens for thousands of years without stopping, without asking permission, without giving explanations, it ceases to be an accident. This is starting to look like a purpose. And purpose implies intention, and intention implies something or someone behind it. And suddenly you are no longer in the territory of pure science. You are in the territory of meaning. You are in the territory of the sacred. The Bari and Wayuu peoples did not have telescopes or atmospheric measuring instruments. They did not know about pressure differences or electrical charges. They did not have access to the scientific explanations that we would develop centuries later. But they knew something that many of us have forgotten in our age of rational explanations and measurable data. They knew that not everything that matters can be measured, and that not everything that repeats itself is automatic, and that sometimes what seems to be just nature following its laws can simultaneously be nature expressing something deeper, something that doesn't contradict science but exists in parallel to it, something that doesn't negate the explanations but adds layers of meaning that numbers alone cannot capture. And perhaps that's what makes places like that so special. Not that they defy reason, but that they expand reason. They force you to consider that understanding how something works is not the same as understanding why it exists. And sometimes the why is more important than the how.
The Catatumbo Lightning is not just ancient, it is a witness, a silent witness to everything that has happened in that region over the centuries. It has seen peoples rise and fall. It has seen empires expand and crumble. It has seen wars, peace, construction, destruction. And at some very specific moments in history, he wasn't just a passive witness, he interfered. Unintentionally, without choice, but with undeniable impact. It was the year 1595. Francis Drake, one of the most feared and respected pirates in history, was at the height of his power. He had plundered Spanish cities throughout the Americas. He had attacked treasures, sunk ships, and terrorized colonial authorities. And now his eyes were on Maracaibo, a rich, poorly defended city, perfect for plunder. He planned everything meticulously. He assembled his fleet, he studied the routes, and he decided to attack during the night. Darkness would be his ally. It would allow his ships to approach unseen. It would allow him to take the city's defenders completely by surprise. Daylight would expose his movements, but night would conceal him perfectly. Or so he thought. Because Drake, however experienced he was as a navigator, however many battles he had won, however many seas he had crossed, did not know about the Catatumbo Lightning. Or, if he did know about it, he completely underestimated its impact. That night, as his fleet began to silently approach the coast, when everything seemed to be going according to plan, when the darkness seemed complete and protective, the sky began to do what it always did. It lit up. Once, twice, 10 times, 100 times. Each flash revealed the ships as if it were midday. Each silent lightning bolt transformed night into day for fractions of a second. But fractions of a second were enough. The city's defenders, who were on guard in the walls and towers, saw the ships approaching. They saw them from miles away. They perfectly understood their positions, their numbers, their intentions. The element of surprise, the advantage Drake had counted on to secure his victory, evaporated instantly. The city had time to prepare, to mobilize defenses, to position cannons, to gather men. When Drake finally got close enough to attack, he didn't find an unprepared city. He found a city ready for war. And he realized, too late, that the night there was not his ally. It was his enemy.
He was forced to retreat, not for lack of courage, not for lack of weapons, not because he had been defeated in combat, but because the sky itself had revealed his presence, because the light that never sleeps had made any surprise attack impossible. Almost 200 years later, in 1823, during the Venezuelan War of Independence, history repeated itself.
literally, as if the sky had a memory, as if it were following a script it had written centuries before. The Spanish fleet, attempting to maintain control over its rebellious colonies, decided to attack the Venezuelan forces established near Maracaibo, and they made exactly the same mistake that Drake had made more than 2 centuries earlier. They tried to use the night as cover. They tried to approach silently, believing that the darkness would protect them, believing they could surprise the enemy. And once again, the Catatumbo did what it always did. It lit up the sky. It revealed the ships. It exposed the positions. It transformed a surprise attack into an expected confrontation. The Venezuelan troops saw everything. They prepared themselves, and they won the decisive battle that would eventually lead to the country's complete independence. Twice in recorded history, that lightning bolt changed the course of human events. Twice it interfered in wars. Twice it decided, without knowing it was deciding, who would win and who would lose. Not by choice, not by political alliance, not by preference for one side or the other, but simply by existing, by doing what it has always done, by illuminating the night without asking anyone's permission. And this raises a question that is almost impossible not to ask. How many other times, in moments that were not recorded, in battles that did not make it into history books, in events that happened far from the eyes of chroniclers, has that light interfered in someone's destiny? How many boats were saved because they saw the light and knew where they were? How many people lost at sea used that light to find their way back? How many decisions were made? How many courses were changed? How many lives were saved or lost because of that constant luminous presence? We will never know. History only records the great events, the famous battles, the important people. But the Catatumbo makes no distinction between the important and the common. It illuminates for everyone, for the admiral and the sailor, for the general and the private, for the recorded and the forgotten. And he continues to do so, night after night, indifferent to our attempts to give meaning to his actions, indifferent to our desire to transform him into a hero or villain of some human narrative. It simply exists, and by existing, you change everything around you, effortlessly, unintentionally, but with absolute and undeniable impact. For thousands of years, the Catatumbo Lightning never failed. Entire generations were born, lived, and died without ever seeing that sky completely dark. The light was as constant as the sunrise, as reliable as gravity. If you asked anyone who lived in that region if it was possible for lightning to stop, they would probably laugh. It would be like asking if the ocean could suddenly decide to have no more waves, or if the mountains could simply disappear overnight. Some things simply are. They don't change, they don't fail, they don't disappear. Then, in January 2010, the impossible happened. The Catatumbo Lightning stopped. It didn't gradually decrease over weeks. It didn't weaken little by little, giving signs that something was wrong. It simply stopped, overnight, as if someone had flipped a switch that nobody knew existed. The first few nights were filled with complete disbelief. People left their homes, looked at the sky, and waited. They thought maybe it was late, that maybe it would come later that night, that maybe it was just a temporary pause. It'll be back tomorrow, they said to each other. It'll definitely be back tomorrow. It's impossible that it stopped completely. But it didn't come back the next day, nor the day after that, nor the day after that. A week passed. The sky remained dark, silent, dead. 2 weeks, nothing. Just total darkness like nothing that had ever existed there before. A month passed, and the sky remained dark, as if it had forgotten its own nature, as if it had lost the script it had followed for millennia. In the end, it was a full 6 weeks, 42 days, 1,008 hours of absolute silence emanating from a sky that had never been still before. There were no major storms during this period. There were no visible catastrophes. There were no earthquakes or volcanic eruptions. Life, practically speaking, went on. The sun still rose. People still worked. Children still played. But something was profoundly different. Because Catatumbo was never just a visual phenomenon. It was rhythm, it was pulse, it was the constant heartbeat of that region. And when the heart stops beating, even if the body still moves, you know that something fundamental is wrong. People who had lived there for decades described the feeling as profound disorientation, like waking up in your own house but not recognizing anything, like looking in the mirror and seeing a face that is yours but also isn't. The night was very dark, too dark. Dark in a way that seemed wrong, unnatural, as if the darkness itself knew it shouldn't be there alone. Some older residents said they couldn't sleep properly, that they would wake up in the middle of the night hoping to see the familiar flashes of light through the window, that the absence of light left them restless in a way they couldn't explain. Scientists from all over the world began to investigate. They traveled to the region, they installed equipment, they took measurements, they collected atmospheric data, they analyzed weather patterns, they looked for any change that could explain what was happening. And they found it. Extreme drought, one of the worst the region had experienced in decades. Lake Maracaibo, that giant that had always fueled the phenomenon with its constant moisture, was drying up. Its level had dropped significantly. The evaporation that normally created the warm, humid air necessary for lightning had decreased drastically. And without sufficient moisture, without the perfect meeting of warm air rising from the lake and cold air descending from the mountains, without that delicate and precise balance that had existed for millennia, the sky simply could not have split. It was pure physics, cause and effect. Without the right conditions, the phenomenon couldn't happen. Simple as that. In March 2010, the rains finally returned. The lake began to recover. Humidity returned to the air, and with it, timidly at first, then with more force, lightning reappeared. The first lights were received as a resurrection. People went out into the streets. They looked at the sky. Some cried. Others simply stood there, in silence, observing something they had taken for granted all their lives and now knew was not. The Catatumbo returned, but something fundamental had changed. Because now everyone knew in a way they could no longer deny or ignore that that light was not eternal, that it depended on invisible balances, on delicate cycles, on conditions that could change. And more importantly, it was a set of conditions that humans were actively changing, because that drought wasn't just a random climatic event, it was part of a larger pattern, a pattern of accelerated climate change, of deforestation, of pollution, of human interference in natural systems. Catatumbo returned that time, but he brought with him a silent warning, a warning that many preferred not to heed, but which was there, undeniable, flashing along with every lightning bolt.
When the Catatumbo disappeared for those 6 weeks, something beyond light was temporarily lost. Let's be honest about it. People's lives didn't stop. The economy didn't collapse. There were no direct deaths caused by the absence of the phenomenon. In practical, objective, measurable terms, the impact was minimal. But there is another kind of impact, one that doesn't appear in graphs or statistics, one that cannot be measured in economic terms or quantified in numbers. An impact that happens in the part of us that is not rational, in the part that needs more than bread to survive. Because the Catatumbo Lightning was never just about electricity in the sky. It was always about something more fundamental. It was a point of reference. It was constant. It was living proof that there are still forces in the world greater than us. Think about it for a moment. How many things in your life can you honestly say will be there tomorrow, that will be there in 10 years, in 100, in 1,000? Almost nothing. Almost everything changes. People come and go, buildings are erected and demolished, technologies emerge and become obsolete in a matter of years. Even the oceans change level, even the mountains erode. Everything is temporary. Everything is transient. Everything has an expiration date, except for certain natural forces, certain phenomena that seem to transcend human time, that were here before us and that silently promise to be here after us. Catatumbo was one of those promises. It was there before any South American civilization. It was there when the first humans arrived in the region. It was there during the height of the pre-Columbian empires. It was there during colonization, during the wars of independence, during the formation of modern nations, during world wars, during revolutions, during everything. And the unspoken promise, deeply felt but unspoken, was that it would still be there after all of this. That when our civilization turned to dust, when our cities were ruins, when our technology was archaeology, Catatumbo would still be illuminating that sky. But that promise, we now know, is not absolute. And when something like this begins to fail, when certainty turns to doubt, when the eternal reveals its fragility, it is not just a phenomenon that is at risk. It is something deeper within us. It is our ability to trust that greater forces still exist, forces that don't ask for permission, that don't obey political agendas, that don't conform to our economic needs, that simply are, regardless of what we do or fail to do. Losing the Catatumbo Lightning would not be like losing a historic building that can be rebuilt. It would not be like losing a work of art that can be reproduced. It would be like losing an entire language, a form of communication between the natural world and human consciousness. Because there are things in the world that teach us without using words. They teach through repetition, through consistency, through persistence, through a presence that never needs to justify itself. The Catatumbo teaches that it is possible to remain even when everything around changes, that it is possible to be constant without being predictable, that it is possible to be powerful without being violent, that light and darkness are not opposites that annihilate each other, but forces that can coexist, that can alternate, that can dance together for 10 hours straight every night. It teaches that the extraordinary can become commonplace without losing its essence, that the miraculous can happen 280 times an hour and still be miraculous, that repetition does not diminish value. Sometimes repetition is precisely what makes something sacred. If we are losing this, if we are putting this at risk, we are not just losing a beautiful natural spectacle, we are losing a silent master, a teacher who doesn't charge tuition and doesn't require attendance, but who was always there for anyone who wanted to learn. And the most important lesson it teaches? That not everything needs to have immediate utility to have absolute value. That not everything needs to serve some human purpose to deserve to exist. That the very presence of something greater than ourselves, something we did not create and do not control, is in itself a form of wealth that does not appear on any financial statement.
Maybe you'll never visit Lake Maracaibo. Maybe you'll never see the Catatumbo Lightning live. Maybe that region will always be on your list of places to visit, but you'll never actually get to see it. And that's okay. Most of us live like that, with lists of places we'd like to go but probably won't, with travel dreams that always get postponed to next year, with mental maps full of pins we'll never physically visit. But that doesn't mean the Catatumbo doesn't affect you. It doesn't mean its existence or disappearance is irrelevant to you. Because places like these, phenomena like these, exist to remind all of humanity, not just those who live near them, of something essential that we are constantly at risk of forgetting. Not everything was made to be dominated. We live in a world where control has become the norm. You can control the temperature of your home with precision to 1 degree. You can control how much light enters through the window. You can control the time you wake up with programmable alarms. You can control what you eat, what you see, what you hear, who you talk to. And that's incredibly comfortable. I'm not going to pretend it isn't. Control brings predictability, and predictability brings security, and security is something every human being legitimately seeks. But there is a silent danger in this total control, a danger that isn't obvious until it's too late. The more control we have, the more we forget that there are forces that will never bend to our will,
forces that exist on a scale so much larger than ours that they don't even perceive our existence. Forces that do what they do independently of approval, planning, or human strategy. And when we forget this completely, when we begin to believe that everything can and should be controlled, when we completely lose touch with the uncontrollable, something within us atrophies. Our capacity for wonder diminishes, our humility disappears, our sense of proportion becomes distorted. We begin to think we are much bigger than we really are, much more important, much more central to the story of the universe. Catatumbo is an antidote to that. It exists without asking your permission, without caring if you find it beautiful or frightening, without paying attention to your opinions, your beliefs, your plans. It simply is. And there is something profoundly liberating about that. Because when you accept, truly accept, that not everything needs to be understood, not everything needs to be explained, not everything needs to make sense within your mental framework, you stop fighting against the world. You stop trying to fit everything into categories. You stop needing definitive answers to every question. You stop feeling that constant anxiety that comes from wanting to control the uncontrollable. And you begin to simply observe, to be present, to allow things to be what they are. The catacomb doesn't need to make sense to you. It doesn't need to fit into your worldview. It doesn't need to serve any purpose in your life. It just needs to be allowed to exist. And if you can do that, if you can look at something bigger than yourself and simply allow it to be, without needing to categorize it, without needing to use it, without needing to master it, you have learned something that goes far beyond that specific phenomenon. You learned a different way of being in the world, a way that is not based on control, but on coexistence, not on domination, but on respect, not on use, but on observation. If you feel you need fewer easy answers and more room for mystery, subscribe to the channel. Because here at Sacred Roots, we don't come with absolute truths. We don't come with complete maps. We don't promise to explain everything. We come with honest questions, with careful observations, with the willingness to remain silent in the face of what we don't fully understand. And sometimes we discover that questions are more sacred than answers, that not knowing everything is more honest than pretending we do, that mystery is not a problem to be solved, but a space to be inhabited. And by inhabiting this space, we discover that there is more life there than in all our certainties combined. In 2020, it happened again, but this time it was different, very different. In 2010, when the lightning stopped for the first time, the world was still surprised. It still thought it was an isolated event, a statistical accident, an anomaly that by definition would not repeat itself. Scientists even wrote papers explaining exactly what had caused the pause. All the data was collected. All the variables were measured. The conclusion was clear: extreme drought, low lake levels, reduced air humidity. But the assumption, never explicitly stated but clearly present, was that this wouldn't happen again anytime soon, that it had been an exceptional combination of factors, that nature would return to its normal equilibrium. So when, just 10 years later, the sky darkened again, when the lightning stopped, when the silence returned to that point where it should never be silent, the reaction was completely different. It wasn't a surprise, it was recognition. The kind of terrible recognition that comes when you realize that something you expected to be the exception is actually the new norm. This is no longer an exception, everyone has realized. It's a trend. The 2020 drought was more intense than the 2010 drought, longer, more severe. Lake Maracaibo shrank even further. Areas that used to be covered by water turned into dry land. Boats that once sailed freely became trapped on mudflats. And with the lake shrinking, with the humidity decreasing,
With the weather patterns becoming increasingly erratic, the phenomenon that had withstood 5 centuries of natural climate change, that had survived ice ages and warming periods, that had persisted through it all, began to show clear and undeniable signs of fragility. Scientists measured again. They compared the 2020 data with that of 2010. They looked for the pattern. They projected future trends. And they arrived at a conclusion they didn't want to, but couldn't avoid. The Catatumbo Lightning is diminishing.
Not dramatically from one year to the next. It's not something you notice by observing for one night or even a week. But when you look at decades of data, when you compare measurements from 50 years ago with those of today, the trend is undeniable. Fewer illuminated nights per year, fewer lightning strikes per hour during the nights that still occur, lower overall intensity of the phenomenon. The sky is still shining, but it is tired. And here's the part that hurts the most. The cause is no mystery. It's not divine punishment that no one can predict or avoid. It's not an inevitable natural cycle that would have happened anyway. It's deforestation, it's pollution, it's climate change caused by human activity. The lake is drying up because the surrounding forests have been cut down. And forests aren't just pretty trees, they're complex systems that regulate rainfall, temperature, and humidity. When you remove a forest, you don't just remove trees, you remove an entire local climate system. The air is changing because we emit gases that alter the global climate. Carbon dioxide, methane, nitrogen oxides. All the small comforts of modern life, all the conveniences that have made our existence easier, all the advances we celebrate, come with an invisible cost. And this cost is being paid, not in money, but in natural balances that, once broken, may never be restored. Catatumbo is not dying of its own accord. It is not old. It has not completed its natural cycle. It has not reached the end of its predetermined time. It is dying because we are killing the conditions that keep it alive. And this is not a metaphor. This is not poetic language. It is literal. Every tree cut down in the region marginally reduces air humidity. Every degree of global warming alters wind patterns. Every change in the global climate has cascading effects on local climates. And perhaps that is the hardest, most uncomfortable, most difficult lesson to accept of all. Even phenomena that seem eternal, forces that appear to be completely beyond our reach, and mysteries that seem to transcend the human scale entirely, depend on balances that we create or destroy with our collective choices. Nothing is truly separate from us. Nothing is truly safe from our interference, not even the sky.
There's a reason why stories like this affect us so deeply. And it's not just pity for the phenomenon, it's not just abstract environmental concern, it's not just fear of the future, it's recognition. Because when we look at the Catatumbo Lightning, when we see its light appear and disappear and appear again, when we observe its persistence in the face of everything, when we witness its revealed fragility, we see something that also lives within us. The light emerges, strong, bright, undeniable. Then it disappears, completely, as if I had never been there. And then it returns, not always at the same pace, not always with the same intensity, but it returns. Human beings are also made up of these cycles. There are days, weeks, sometimes entire months when everything inside you is illuminated. You feel mental clarity, you feel purpose, you feel strength. You feel you understand your place in the world and that you are walking in the right direction. In those moments, you feel unstoppable, as if you could face any challenge, as if life made sense, as if all the pieces of the puzzle finally fit together. And then, without warning, comes the darkness. Not little by little, not gradually, suddenly. And you're left there, in the dark, trying to remember what it was like when everything was illuminated, trying to access that clarity that seemed so obvious days ago, but is now completely inaccessible. And one wonders, in those difficult moments, in those deep valleys of existence, Will the light return? Or was it just a temporary moment, and now will I be stuck here in darkness forever? The Catatumbo answers that question every night, without words, just by existing. Yes, the light returns. It always returns. But she doesn't come back because you deserve it. She doesn't come back because you asked her to. She doesn't come back because you did something right or wrong. She comes back because it's in her nature to come back, because that's what she does, because she doesn't know how to do anything else. And perhaps human life is like that too. Perhaps moments of clarity and moments of darkness are not rewards or punishments. Perhaps they are simply cycles, part of the very structure of what it means to be alive. Darkness is not the end. It is merely the interval. It is the space between one light and another. And light doesn't need to be constant to be real. It doesn't need to be always present to be true. It can appear and disappear and still be the same light. Catatumbo teaches this without trying, without sermons, without explicit philosophy, just by being, just by doing what it has always done. Perhaps that's what places like this truly offer us, not answers, not solutions, but models, natural patterns that reflect internal patterns, ways of existing that, if we pay attention, can teach us different ways of living. Because when you see something that insists, that persists, that continues doing what it does even when nobody is watching, even when the conditions aren't perfect, you learn something about persistence. You learn that staying doesn't mean being perfect. It means continuing. It means not giving up. It means coming back even after stopping. It means lighting up again even after it's gone out. And perhaps that is the purest form of existence, not to shine constantly without flaws, but to shine, to fade, and to choose to shine again, repeatedly, infinitely, until you can't anymore.
Now, I'm going to ask you something, and I'd like you to really consider it, not just as a rhetorical question, but as something to think about honestly. If the Catatumbo Lightning disappears completely, what will we truly have lost? You think before you automatically respond. You go beyond the obvious answer, because it's not just the light in the sky. It's not just a beautiful natural phenomenon that no longer exists. It's not just another entry on the growing list of extinct things. It is a living reminder that the world still holds forces that do not seek our approval to exist. It is constant proof that not everything revolves around human needs. It is a silent but insistent reminder that mystery is not a problem to be solved. It is a space to be respected. We live in a time where everything needs to be explained, where every phenomenon needs to be dissected until no mystery remains, where the very word mystery has become almost synonymous with temporary ignorance that science will eventually resolve. But some mysteries aren't about a lack of information. Some mysteries are about the very nature of reality being greater than our capacity to fully comprehend it. The Catatumbo phenomenon can be explained scientifically. Yes, we know exactly which atmospheric processes create those lightning bolts. We know exactly what conditions are necessary. We know exactly why it happens there and not in other places. But knowing all this doesn't diminish the fact that when you're standing there in the middle of the night with the sky splitting above you 280 times an hour, you're not thinking about atmospheric pressure or electrical charges. You're feeling something much bigger, something that can't be contained in equations. You feel like you're part of something, that you're not alone in the universe, that there are forces operating on scales that make your personal problems, your anxieties, your worries infinitely small in comparison. And there's a strange comfort in that, a comfort in realizing that you're not as important as you think, that the world doesn't revolve around you, that there are cosmic dances happening that don't know and don't care that you exist. When we lose phenomena like this, when we allow them to disappear through negligence, greed, or collective laziness, we don't just lose beauty, we lose humility. We lose the ability to remain silent in the face of something greater. We lose the visceral reminder that we are not the sole authors of this story, that we are not in control, that we never were. And by losing that, we lose an essential part of what it means to be human, the part that knows how to bow down, the part that knows how to admire, the part that can become small without feeling diminished. Leave a comment. Is there something in your life, something in nature, something in the world that you consider sacred not because someone taught you, but because you simply feel it? Something that if it disappeared would make you feel the world became poorer. Sometimes listening to how other people perceive the sacred, how other people experience mystery, is a different and more honest way of understanding the world than any scientific explanation.
Perhaps you are wondering now, after all this, after understanding what is at stake, after feeling the urgency of the situation, okay, but what can I do about it? How can I, an ordinary person living far away, have any impact on the fate of the Catatumbo Lightning? And the honest answer, the answer that isn't comfortable but is true, is this. Saving the Catatumbo isn't about a specific donation. It's not about signing an online petition. It's not about posting something on social media and feeling good about having done your part. It's about something much deeper and much more difficult. It's about fundamentally changing the way we relate to the planet, to nature, to everything that exists beyond immediate human needs. Catatumbo is dying because the climate is changing. And the climate is changing because, as a species, we treat Earth as an infinite resource, as something that exists only to serve us, as something with no intrinsic value beyond its usefulness to us. We cut down forests because we need wood, space, and land for agriculture. We pollute rivers because it's cheaper to dump waste into the water than to treat it properly. We emit gases non-stop because our entire economy is built on burning fossil fuels. And then we are surprised when natural phenomena begin to disappear, as if there were no connection, as if we could fundamentally alter the conditions that sustain these phenomena and expect them to continue existing exactly as they always have. But here's the hard truth we need to accept. You're not going to save the Catatumbo alone. Neither am I, nor is any isolated individual action. This requires systemic change. It requires governments that prioritize environmental preservation above economic growth at any cost. It requires companies that stop treating quarterly profit as the only valid objective. It requires entire societies that learn, collectively, to value what cannot be monetized. And that seems impossible. I know it seems that way. It seems like the problem is too big, too complex, too deeply rooted in the fundamental structures of how we live. And maybe it is. But that doesn't mean there's nothing you can do. It just means that what you can do is different from what you probably expected. You can begin by treating the sacred as sacred, not necessarily in a religious sense. It doesn't have to be about gods or rituals or specific beliefs, but in the sense of profound respect, of recognizing intrinsic value, of understanding that some things deserve to exist simply because they exist, not because they are useful to us. When you see a tree, you can choose to see only wood, raw material, resource, something that can be cut and transformed into furniture, paper, or construction materials. Or you can see a living system, something that is breathing, growing, participating in complex cycles of water and nutrients, something that harbors life, something that produces oxygen, something that when removed leaves a hole that is not only visual but functional in the ecosystem. When you see a river, you can only see water, something that flows from one place to another, something that can be diverted, dammed, used as needed. Or you could see it as an artery of the planet, something that connects mountains and oceans, something that sustains countless forms of life, something that, when polluted or dried up, kills everything that depends on it. When you look at the sky, you can only see empty space, just the place where airplanes fly and clouds form. Or you could see a complex system of gases, pressures, and temperatures in delicate equilibrium, something that allows life, something that protects the planet from radiation, something that, when altered, changes everything.
And perhaps if more people start to look at it this way, if more people stop seeing nature as a backdrop to human life and start seeing it as an active participant, as something with its own right to exist, perhaps there is still time. Not to save the planet, that phrase has always been somewhat absurd. The planet will continue to exist with or without us. It has already survived 5 mass extinctions. It has been covered in ice. It has been a toxic desert. It survives. It always survives. What we are really trying to save is not the planet. It's the possibility of mystery. It's the chance that future generations can still look up and see something they don't fully understand but deeply respect. It's ensuring that there are still places in the world where forces greater than ourselves operate freely. Because if we lose all these places, if we transform the entire planet into a domestic garden where everything is controlled and predictable, if we completely eliminate the wild, the uncontrollable, the mysterious, we lose something essential about what it means to be alive. We have lost the capacity to feel wonder. And without wonder, what remains? Only functionality, only utility, only mechanical existence from one day to the next. So what can you do? You can start by paying attention. You can stop seeing the world as a resource and start seeing it as a shared home. You can make choices, both small and large, that acknowledge that you are not alone here, that we share this space with countless other life forms, all with the same fundamental right to exist. And perhaps most importantly, you can teach this to those around you, to your children, if you have any, to your friends, to your community. You can plant seeds of a different way of seeing the world, a way that doesn't place humans at the center of everything. Because systemic change doesn't happen from the top down. It doesn't happen because politicians decide. It happens when enough people change their way of thinking, and that collective change eventually forces change in larger structures. It's slow, it's frustrating, it often seems pointless, but it's the only real way out we have.
10 years after the first hiatus, in 2020, Catatumbo stopped again. But this time it was different, very different. In 2010, when it first happened, the world treated it as an anomaly, as an isolated event, as that statistical exception that proves the rule. Scientists studied it, published papers, explained exactly what had caused it, and the implicit conclusion was that it wouldn't happen again anytime soon. But in 2020, when the sky darkened again, when the lightning disappeared once more, the reaction was completely different. It wasn't surprise, it was recognition. The terrifying kind of recognition that comes when you realize that what you expected to be the exception is actually the new norm. The drought was more intense. The lake shrank even further. Areas that were once water turned into dry mud. And the data, when compared to previous decades, showed something undeniable. The Catatumbo Lightning is diminishing, progressively, consistently, predictably. Fewer nights per year, fewer lightning strikes per hour, lower overall intensity. And the cause? It's no mystery. It's not a natural cycle. It's not divine will. It's deforestation, pollution, climate change caused by human actions. The lake dries up because the forests were cut down. The climate changes because we emit gases non-stop. The phenomenon dies because we kill the conditions that sustain it. Catatumbo is not old. It hasn't reached its full potential. It is being killed by us. And perhaps that's the hardest lesson. Even what seems eternal depends on the balances we create or destroy. You must be wondering, what can I do? And the honest answer isn't comfortable. Saving the Catatumbo isn't about a donation. It's not about signing an online petition. It's not about sharing a post. It's about fundamentally changing how we relate to the planet. Catatumbo is dying because we treat the Earth as an infinite resource. We cut down forests because we need space. We pollute because it's cheaper. We emit gases because our economy depends on it. And we are surprised when natural phenomena disappear. You alone won't save the Catatumbo. Neither will I, nor will any individual action. This requires systemic change, Governments that prioritize preservation, companies that value more than profit, societies that learn to respect what cannot be monetized. Does it seem impossible? Maybe it is. But you can start by treating the sacred as sacred. When you see a tree, don't just see wood. See a living system, something that breathes, that harbors life, that produces oxygen. When you see a river, don't just see water. See the artery of the planet, something that connects, sustains, and allows life. When you look at the sky, don't see empty space. See a delicate balance that protects everything. And if more people start looking at it this way, if more people stop seeing nature as a backdrop and start seeing it as a participant, perhaps there is still time. Not to save the planet survives, it always has, but to preserve the possibility of mystery, to ensure that future generations can still see something greater than themselves, to preserve places where forces beyond us operate freely. Because if we lose that, if we completely eliminate the wild, the uncontrollable, the mysterious, we lose something essential about being alive. We've lost wonder, and without wonder, what's left? Just functionality, just mechanical existence. You can start by paying attention, making choices that acknowledge you're not alone here, teaching this to those around you. Systemic change doesn't come from the top. It comes when enough people change the way they think. It's slow, frustrating, often it seems pointless, but it's the only real way.
There is a place on the planet where night is never absolute, where the sky refuses to be silent, where the light persists, even when no one is looking. The Catatumbo Lightning doesn't ask for attention. It doesn't require applause. It doesn't need to be understood in order to continue existing. He just does what he's always done. Illuminate. The sky breaks. Refuse silence. And perhaps that's precisely where its greatest lesson lies. We live in a world that tries to explain everything, classify everything, control everything. But there are things that don't exist to be dominated. They exist only to remind us. Remember that we are not the center of attention, that we are not in control, that there are greater forces at work, far beyond our control. When the sky silently tears open above the Catatumbo, he's not giving us any answers. It's inviting us to stop, to be observed, accepting that not everything needs to be resolved. Not every mystery is a problem. Sometimes mystery is precisely what keeps us human. As long as this light continues to shine in the Venezuelan sky or in the memory of those who have already seen it, there will still be places in the world where the sacred breathes. This was another episode of Sacred Routes. If this journey touched you in any way, leave a like and share with someone who also feels that the world is bigger than it seems. And write in the comments, which sacred place, mysterious phenomenon, or forgotten history would you like, which we will explore in the next episode. We'll meet again on the next journey.